Welcome to your bedtime history story. Tonight, let's travel to ancient Egypt and discover the gentle rise of a forgotten pharaoh. Imagine a night in ancient Egypt. The moon hangs low over the slow, eternal flow of the Nile. Palm trees sway gently in the warm breeze. In the distance, the silhouettes of the great pyramids rise against the starlit sky, silent witnesses to the secrets of 1,000 years. But tonight, our story does not begin in a palace or a temple. It begins in the dust and darkness of a military camp, far from the golden halls of the pharaohs. Here, among the flickering campfires and the quiet murmurs of soldiers, a young man named Horemheb sharpens his sword, unaware that fate is watching him. Who was Horemheb? To most, he was just another soldier, one of thousands who marched under the burning Egyptian sun, fighting for a country that often forgot their names. He was not born to royalty. He had no claim to the throne. His hands were calloused, his back scarred by years of training and battle. But in the shadows of history, Horemheb's story would become one of the most extraordinary tales ever told. How does a simple soldier rise to become the ruler of the most powerful nation on earth? What secrets did he carry? What dreams haunted him at night? And what price did he pay for power? Tonight, as you settle in and let the world fade away, we invite you to journey with us into the heart of ancient Egypt. We will walk beside Horemheb as he faces war, betrayal, and the mysterious will of the gods. We will see the world through his eyes, the fear, the hope, the loneliness, and the ambition that drove him forward. This is not just the story of a king. It is the story of a man, one who began his life in the dust and danger of the army, and who, against all odds, would one day wear the double crown of Egypt. Let us begin, then, on a night much like this one. The year is around 1330 BCE. Egypt is a land of turmoil. The old gods are in conflict, the throne is unstable, and enemies gather at the borders. In a camp on the edge of the desert, Horemheb sits quietly, lost in thought. He does not know it yet, but his life is about to change forever. As the firelight dances on his face, Horemheb remembers his childhood in a small village. He remembers the stories his mother told him, stories of gods and monsters, of heroes and kings. He remembers the day he first held a wooden sword, dreaming of glory. But dreams are dangerous things in Egypt. They can lift a man up or destroy him. Tonight, Horemheb's only concern is survival. Tomorrow he will march into battle. He will fight for his life, for his comrades, and for a country that may never know his name. But somewhere in the darkness, destiny is waiting. To understand Horemheb's journey, we must first understand the world he lived in. Ancient Egypt, at the end of the 18th dynasty, was a land of both wonder and uncertainty. The great temples of Karnak and Luxor stood as monuments to the gods, their columns rising like forests of stone. The Nile, lifeblood of the nation, flowed steadily from south to north, bringing fertility to the fields and hope to the people. But beneath the surface, Egypt was restless. The reign of Akhenaten, the heretic king, had shaken the foundations of society. The old gods had been cast aside in favor of a single deity, Aten, the sun disk. Temples were closed, priests were dismissed, and the people were left confused and afraid. After Akhenaten's death, the young Tutankhamun tried to restore the old ways, but the scars of change remained. It was a time of uncertainty, of shifting loyalties and hidden dangers. The throne itself was fragile, passed from one ruler to another, sometimes by blood, sometimes by force. In the shadows, powerful priests and ambitious generals plotted their own rise to power. For the ordinary people of Egypt, life was a daily struggle. Farmers toiled in the fields, their backs bent under the sun. Craftsmen shaped stone and gold into offerings for the gods. Women cared for their families, weaving linen and grinding grain. Children played by the river, their laughter echoing across the water. And then there were the soldiers, men like Horemheb. They came from every corner of Egypt, from the crowded streets of Memphis, from the green banks of the Nile, from the dusty villages of the south. Some joined the army for adventure, others for food, still others for the promise of glory. But all of them knew the risks. War was never far away. In the camp, life was harsh and disciplined. The day began before sunrise with the sound of the captain's horn. Soldiers rose from their mats, washed in the cold water of the river, and gathered for roll call. Training was relentless, marching, drilling, practicing with spear and shield. The officers demanded obedience, and punishment for failure was swift. Meals were simple: bread, onions, dried fish, and beer. At night, the men gathered around the fires, sharing stories of home, of battles won and lost, of dreams for the future. Some prayed to the gods for protection. Others simply stared into the flames, lost in their own thoughts.
Horemheb was not the strongest or the fastest, but he was determined. He listened more than he spoke, watched more than he acted. He learned the ways of the army, how to read the mood of the men, how to spot danger before it struck, how to survive when others fell. He made friends, brothers in arms who would fight and die beside him. He also made enemies, for the army was a world of competition and ambition. But above all, Horemheb learned to trust himself. In a world where nothing was certain, that was the greatest lesson of all. Religion was everywhere in Egypt. The gods watched over every aspect of life: birth and death, love and war, the rising and setting of the sun. Soldiers carried amulets for protection, small images of Horus, the falcon god, or Anubis, the guardian of the dead. Before battle, the priests would bless the army, sprinkling holy water and chanting prayers. But for Horemheb, faith was complicated. He had seen too much suffering to believe that the gods always listened. He had watched friends die on the battlefield, their prayers unanswered. He had seen the temples grow rich while the people went hungry. Yet in the quiet moments before sleep, he still whispered the old prayers, just in case. Sometimes in the darkness, Horemheb wondered about fate. Was his life truly his own, or was he just a piece in a game played by the gods? Did the dreams that haunted him mean something more? Was there a purpose to his struggles, or was he simply trying to survive? Like many soldiers, Horemheb left a family behind. His mother, old and frail, still lived in the village where he was born. His father had died years before, a victim of disease or perhaps a snake bite. No one could remember for sure. Horemheb had younger brothers and sisters, and he sent them what little money he could spare. He missed them terribly. At night, he would remember the sound of his mother's voice, the taste of her bread, the way his siblings laughed as they played by the river. He wondered if they were safe, if they had enough to eat, if they remembered him at all. War changes a man. It hardens the heart, sharpens the senses, but it also leaves scars that never heal. Horemheb carried those scars with him, hidden beneath his armor. The Egyptian army was both a tool of the pharaoh and a reflection of the nation itself. It was a place where a man could rise by merit, where courage and skill were rewarded. But it was also a place of danger, where a single mistake could mean death. Horemheb's commanders saw something in him, a quiet strength, a willingness to do what others would not. They gave him more responsibility, trusted him with difficult tasks. He learned to lead, to inspire, to make hard choices. But leadership came at a cost. The higher he rose, the more enemies he made. Ambition was a dangerous thing in Egypt, and those who reached for power often found themselves betrayed. As Horemheb sat by the fire that night, he could feel the tension in the air. Rumors spread through the camp. The Hittites were massing in the north, the Libyans raiding from the west, the Nubians restless in the south. The pharaoh was young and inexperienced, the priests divided, the people anxious. Egypt was a land on the edge, of war, of change, of something unknown. And in the darkness, Horemheb wondered what the future would bring. He did not know that his own future would be more extraordinary than anything he could imagine. He did not know that he would one day stand before the gods as king, that his name would be carved in stone, that his choices would shape the destiny of a nation. But for now, he was just a soldier, one among many, waiting for the dawn. As you listen to this story, imagine the world of Horemheb, the scent of the river, the heat of the sun, the weight of armor on his shoulders. Imagine the fear and excitement of a young man on the edge of greatness, not yet knowing what the future holds. This is the beginning of a journey from the dust of the battlefield to the throne of Egypt, a journey that will test the limits of courage, loyalty, and ambition, a journey that will reveal the strange and secret heart of ancient Egypt. So close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let us travel back in time. The story of Horemheb is about to begin. Before we continue our journey with Horemheb, I'd like to gently remind you, if you're enjoying this story, please consider giving this video a like. It helps more people discover our channel and lets us know you'd like to hear more stories from the ancient world. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new bedtime journey into history. Thank you for being part of our community. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. In the army camp, the world stirred to life. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of earth and river water. Birds called from the reeds, and somewhere a donkey brayed, impatient for its morning feed. Horemheb awoke before the sun, as he did every day. He lay for a moment on his simple mat, listening to the quiet breathing of the men around him. The camp was a patchwork of tents and makeshift shelters scattered along the edge of the desert. Smoke from last night's fires drifted lazily upward, mingling with the morning mist. He sat up, stretching his arms and rolling his shoulders. His body ached from yesterday's drills, but he was used to the pain. It was the price of survival. He reached for his water jar, splashed his face, and began to prepare for another day in the life of a soldier. Life in the Egyptian army was built on routine and discipline. Each day began with the captain's horn, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through dreams and silence alike. The men rose quickly, knowing that hesitation meant punishment. They washed in the cold water of the river, shivering as the chill bit into their skin. Breakfast was simple: a round loaf of bread, a handful of dates, sometimes a piece of dried fish if supplies were good. The men ate in silence, their minds already turning to the tasks ahead. Some prayed quietly, touching amulets of Horus or Anubis for luck. Others simply stared into the distance, lost in thought. After breakfast came the drills. The soldiers lined up in rows, spears and shields at the ready. The officers barked orders, their voices echoing across the camp. March, halt, turn, attack, defend, over and over until the movements became second nature. Sweat ran down their faces, dust clung to their skin, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. Horemheb was not the strongest among them, nor the fastest, but he was steady, reliable, and quick to learn. He watched the officers closely, noting how they moved, how they spoke, how they commanded respect. He learned to read the mood of the men, to sense when fear or anger threatened to break the fragile order of the camp. In the army, every man was both a brother and a rival. The bonds of friendship were forged in hardship, shared meals, shared jokes, shared dangers. Horemheb made friends. Mena, the quick-witted archer from the Delta. Pharaoh, the giant from Nubia, with a laugh as loud as thunder. Sitra, the quiet one, who could mend a wound as easily as he could wield a spear. But there were also rivals. The army was a place of ambition, and every promotion was hard won. Some men resented Horemheb's growing reputation. They whispered behind his back, watched for any sign of weakness. In the evenings, when the work was done, the camp was alive with stories and laughter, but also with rumors and jealousies. Horemheb learned to keep his own counsel. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his words were careful and measured. He knew that in the army, a careless word could be as dangerous as a careless sword. Life in the camp was not easy. The tents offered little protection from the heat of the day or the cold of the night. Sand found its way into everything: clothes, food, even dreams. Insects bit, wounds festered, and disease was a constant threat. Supplies were never certain. Some days the bread was stale and the beer sour. Other days there was nothing at all, and the men went hungry. Horemheb learned to make do, to share what he had, to endure without complaint. There were moments of fear, too. The threat of battle hung over the camp like a storm cloud. Sometimes, at night, the men would hear distant drums or see the glow of enemy fires on the horizon. The officers would walk the camp, checking weapons, whispering orders. Everyone knew that at any moment the peace could shatter. In the quiet moments, Horemheb's thoughts turned to home. He remembered the narrow streets of his village, the cool shade of the sycamore trees, the laughter of his younger siblings. He remembered his mother's gentle hands, the stories she told by the fire, the taste of her bread. He missed them all. Sometimes he would take out a small token, a carved amulet, a scrap of linen, a faded letter, and hold it in his hand, drawing strength from the memory. He wondered if they were safe, if they had enough to eat, if they thought of him as often as he thought of them. War had taken him far from home, but it had not taken his heart. In the darkest hours, it was the thought of his family that kept him going.
Religion was woven into every part of a soldier's life. Before battle, the priests would come to the camp, carrying incense and sacred oils. They would bless the men, sprinkle holy water, and offer prayers to the gods. Horus for victory, Anubis for protection, Osiris for safe passage to the afterlife. Horemheb wore a small amulet around his neck, a gift from his mother. It was shaped like a scarab beetle, symbol of rebirth and protection. He touched it often, especially before battle, whispering the old prayers he had learned as a child. But faith was not always easy. Horemheb had seen friends die, their prayers unanswered. He had watched the temples grow rich while the people went hungry. Sometimes he wondered if the gods truly listened, or if they were as distant and indifferent as the stars. Still, in the quiet moments before sleep, he found comfort in the rituals, the familiar words, the scent of incense, the flicker of candlelight. They reminded him that he was part of something greater, a story that stretched back to the dawn of time. The world outside the camp was dangerous and unpredictable. Rumors spread quickly. The Hittites were gathering in the north, the Libyans raiding from the west, the Nubians restless in the south. The Pharaoh was young and inexperienced, the priests divided, the people anxious. Every day the officers drilled the men harder, preparing them for the battles to come. Scouts returned with news of enemy movements, and the camp buzzed with tension. Weapons were checked and rechecked, armor repaired, supplies counted. Horemheb felt the weight of responsibility growing heavier. He was no longer just a foot soldier. He had been given command of a small unit. The lives of his men depended on his decisions. He trained them well, taught them to trust each other, to move as one. He knew that in battle, unity was the key to survival. At night, as the camp settled into uneasy silence, Horemheb would lie awake, staring at the stars. He dreamed of glory, not for its own sake, but for what it could bring. He wanted to make his family proud, to prove that a man's worth was not measured by his birth, but by his deeds. He dreamed, too, of peace, of a day when he could return home, lay down his sword, and live a simple life. But deep down, he knew that the world was changing, and that his path would not be an easy one. Sometimes he wondered if he was meant for something more. He remembered the old stories of men who rose from nothing to become heroes, of kings chosen by the gods. He wondered if such things could still happen, or if they were just tales to comfort children. As darkness fell, the camp grew quiet. The men gathered around the fires, sharing stories and songs, trying to forget the dangers that waited beyond the light. Horemheb listened, sometimes joining in, sometimes sitting apart, lost in thought. He watched the flames dance, the shadows flicker, the stars wheel overhead. He thought of the battles to come, the friends he might lose, the choices he would have to make. He felt fear, but also hope, a hope that somehow, against all odds, he could shape his own destiny. In the distance,
A jackal howled, and the men fell silent. The night was full of secrets, and the future was unknown. This was the life of Horemheb, a life of hardship and hope, of fear and courage, of dreams and doubts. He was a soldier like so many before him, but his story was just beginning. As you drift into sleep, imagine the world of Horemheb, the heat of the sun, the weight of armor, the taste of bread and beer, the sound of laughter and sorrow. Imagine the courage it took to face each new day, not knowing what the future would bring. And remember, even the greatest journeys begin with a single step.
The days of training and waiting were over. The rumors that had haunted the camp for weeks became reality. The Hittites, Egypt's ancient rivals, were on the move. Their armies, fierce and disciplined, had crossed the northern borders, threatening the very heart of the kingdom. The call to arms echoed through the camp, and every man knew that the time had come to prove himself. For Horemheb, the night before battle was the longest of his life. The camp was restless, filled with the sounds of sharpening blades, whispered prayers, and the nervous laughter of men trying to hide their fear. Fires burned low, casting flickering shadows on faces drawn tight with worry. Officers moved from tent to tent, checking weapons, giving last-minute orders and offering words of encouragement. Horemheb sat with his unit, his hands steady as he inspected his spear and shield. Around him, his comrades prepared in their own ways. Mena, the archer, fletched his arrows with careful precision. Pharaoh, the giant, polished his axe, humming a song from his homeland. Sitra, the healer, checked his pouch of herbs and bandages, his eyes distant and thoughtful. Some men prayed to the gods, clutching amulets and reciting ancient hymns. Others wrote hurried letters to loved ones, hoping that their words would find their way home if they did not return. Horemheb found himself thinking of his mother, of the stories she told him about the gods who watched over the brave and the just. He wondered if they would watch over him now. At dawn, the army assembled. Thousands of men stood in tight ranks, their armor gleaming in the early light. The banners of Egypt, bright with the symbols of Horus and Ra, fluttered in the breeze. The generals rode along the lines, their voices ringing out above the clamor. The priests arrived, dressed in white linen, carrying incense and sacred oils. They moved among the soldiers, blessing them, sprinkling holy water, and chanting prayers for victory. The air was thick with the scent of myrrh and frankincense, and for a moment, even the most hardened warriors felt a sense of calm. Horemheb stood with his unit, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked to the horizon where the enemy waited. The Hittites were known for their chariots, swift, deadly machines that could break the strongest lines. Their armies wore bronze armor and carried curved swords, their faces painted with the symbols of their gods. The order was given, and the army began to march. The ground trembled beneath their feet, a living river of men and weapons flowing toward destiny. The first clash was sudden and brutal. Arrows darkened the sky, whistling down like a storm of death. Shields rattled, men shouted, and the world dissolved into chaos. The Hittite chariots thundered across the field, their wheels churning up dust and blood. Horses screamed, men fell, and the line wavered. Horemheb fought with everything he had. He moved as he had been trained, shield up, spear thrust, step forward, step back. The noise was overwhelming, the clash of metal, the cries of the wounded, the roar of the enemy. He saw friends fall, saw the fear in their eyes, saw the determination in others. At one point, the line began to break. The Hittite chariots had found a gap, and panic threatened to spread. Horemheb saw his commander, a seasoned officer named Nebaman, fall from his horse, wounded and surrounded. Without thinking, Horemheb charged forward, rallying the men around him. "Hold the line!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Protect the commander!" With a surge of courage, he and a handful of soldiers formed a shield wall around Nebaman, fending off the enemy long enough for reinforcements to arrive. The moment was desperate, but Horemheb's quick thinking and bravery turned the tide. The line held, and the Hittites were forced back. As the sun climbed higher, the battle raged on. The field was a nightmare of dust, blood, and broken bodies. Horemheb fought until his arms ached and his vision blurred. He lost track of time, lost track of everything except the need to survive. Then, suddenly, the enemy began to falter. The Egyptian chariots, led by a young prince, swept across the field, breaking the Hittite lines. The soldiers cheered, their spirits renewed. Horemheb found himself at the center of the action, his name shouted by men who had never noticed him before. When the battle finally ended, the field was silent, except for the moans of the wounded and the cries of the victors. The Egyptians had won, but at a terrible cost.
Horemheb stood among the survivors, his body bruised and bloodied, his mind reeling from the horrors he had seen. That night, the camp was a place of both mourning and celebration. Fires burned bright, and the priests moved among the men, tending to the wounded and offering prayers for the dead. The officers gathered to discuss the battle, to count the losses, to plan for the days ahead. Horemheb was summoned to the commander's tent. He entered, unsure of what to expect. Nebamun, his arm bandaged, greeted him with a rare smile. "You saved my life today," the commander said. "You saved many lives. The men speak of your courage. You have the makings of a leader, Horemheb." The words filled him with pride and with fear. Leadership was both an honor and a burden. He knew that every decision would carry the weight of men's lives. But he also knew that this was his chance to rise, to prove himself, to shape his own destiny. Word of his bravery spread quickly through the camp. Men who had barely noticed him before now greeted him with respect. Some envied him, others admired him, but all recognized that Horemheb was no longer just another soldier. In the days that followed, the army honored the dead. The priests led solemn processions, chanting prayers to guide the fallen to the afterlife. Offerings were made to Osiris and Anubis, and the names of the dead were written on strips of papyrus to be remembered forever. Horemheb attended the rituals, standing among his men, feeling the weight of loss and the strange, hollow joy of survival. He thought of the friends he had lost, of the families who would never see their sons again. He wondered if the gods had truly watched over them, or if fate was as blind and indifferent as the battlefield itself. But there was also hope. The victory had brought honor to the army, and to Horemheb himself. He was promoted, given command of a larger unit, trusted with greater responsibility. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time,
he felt that he might have a place in the story of Egypt. War in ancient Egypt was not just a matter of swords and shields. It was a sacred act, a struggle between order and chaos, between Ma'at and Isfet. The soldiers believed that their battles echoed the eternal struggle of the gods, that every victory was a sign of divine favor. Strange things happened on the battlefield. Some men claimed to see visions, falcons soaring overhead, the eyes of Horus watching from the clouds. Others spoke of dreams in which the gods appeared, offering guidance or warning. Horemheb himself had strange dreams in the nights after the battle, visions of a throne, of a crown, of a voice calling his name. He kept these dreams to himself, unsure if they were a blessing or a curse. But deep down, he felt that something had changed. The world was no longer the same, and neither was he. As the army returned to camp, Horemheb's name was on everyone's lips. The officers praised his courage. The men looked to him for leadership. He was invited to dine with the commanders, to share his thoughts on strategy and discipline. But fame was a double-edged sword. With recognition came jealousy, and with power came danger. Horemheb knew that he would have to be careful, to watch for those who might seek to bring him down. The army was a world of ambition, and every step up the ladder brought new risks. Still, he could not help but feel a sense of pride. He had survived the test of battle, had saved lives, had earned the respect of his peers. For the first time, he allowed himself to dream, not just of survival, but of greatness. In the quiet moments after the battle, Horemheb sat alone by the river, watching the water flow beneath the stars. He thought of the men he had lost, of the friends who would never return home. He thought of his family, of the village far away, and of the life he had left behind. He wondered what the future would bring. Would he rise higher, or would he fall? Would the gods continue to watch over him, or would they turn away? He did not know, but he knew that he would face whatever came with courage and determination. The journey was just beginning.
Victory on the battlefield brought Horemheb more than just honor. It brought him to the very gates of power. Word of his bravery and leadership spread beyond the army, reaching the ears of those who ruled Egypt from the heart of its greatest cities. Soon a summons arrived. Horemheb was to travel to the capital, to stand before the highest officials in the land. The journey from the army camp to the city was both exciting and daunting. Horemheb traveled by boat along the Nile, passing fields of green and gold, villages bustling with life, and temples rising like mountains from the riverbanks. The air was thick with the scent of lotus and incense, and everywhere the eyes of the gods seemed to watch. As the city of Thebes, or Memphis, depending on the period, came into view, Horemheb felt a mixture of awe and anxiety. The city was a world apart from the army camps and villages he had known. Its streets were crowded with merchants, priests, scribes, and nobles. The palaces gleamed with gold and alabaster, and the great temples echoed with the chants of priests and the cries of sacred animals. Horemheb was led through the city's grand avenues, past statues of pharaohs and gods, to the palace itself, a place of beauty and danger in equal measure. The palace was a maze of halls and courtyards, filled with the scent of perfumes and the rustle of silk. Servants hurried to and fro, carrying messages and gifts, while guards stood watch at every door. He was brought before the council of high officials, viziers, generals, and the chief priests of Amun. Their faces were stern, their eyes sharp. They questioned him about the battle, about his decisions, about his loyalty to Egypt and the gods. Horemheb answered honestly, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering. Among the officials was a man named Ai, a powerful and cunning vizier who had served several pharaohs. Ai watched Horemheb closely, weighing his words, searching for weakness. But Horemheb's reputation had preceded him, and even the most skeptical officials could not deny his courage and skill. No one could rise in Egypt without the blessing, or at least the tolerance, of the priesthood. The temples of Amun, Ra, and Osiris were not just places of worship. They were centers of power, wealth, and influence. The high priests commanded vast estates, commanded armies of workers, and advised the pharaoh on matters both sacred and political. Horemheb was invited to the great temple of Amun, where he witnessed rituals older than memory. Priests in white linen moved in solemn procession, carrying sacred relics and chanting prayers that echoed through the halls. The air was thick with incense, and the walls glowed with the light of 1,000 oil lamps. In a private chamber, Horemheb met with the high priest, a man of great wisdom and ambition. They spoke of the gods, of Egypt's future, of the need for strong leadership. The priest hinted at the dangers facing the kingdom: enemies at the borders, unrest among the people, and, most dangerous of all, division within the palace itself. Life in the palace was a constant dance of alliances and betrayals. Every noble, every official, every servant had their own ambitions, their own secrets. Whispers filled the corridors, rumors of plots against the pharaoh, of bribes and poison, of secret meetings in the dead of night. Horemheb quickly learned that the skills he had honed on the battlefield were just as valuable in the world of politics. He watched, listened, and learned. He made allies among the officers and scribes, won the respect of the priests, and avoided the traps set by jealous rivals. One night, as he walked the palace gardens, Horemheb overheard a conversation between two courtiers. They spoke in hushed tones of a plot to undermine the pharaoh, of secret messages sent to foreign powers, of gold changing hands in the shadows. Horemheb realized that the dangers of the court were as real and as deadly as any he had faced in war. Strange things happened in the palace. Some said the gods themselves walked the halls at night, their footsteps echoing in empty chambers. Others spoke of omens: a statue that wept, a falcon that circled the palace 3 times, a dream that foretold disaster. Horemheb was not a superstitious man, but even he could not ignore the sense of unease that hung over the city. He began to have dreams, vivid, unsettling visions of crowns and serpents, of blood and fire, of a throne waiting in darkness. He kept these dreams to himself, unsure if they were warnings or promises. One day, while exploring the palace library, Horemheb discovered an ancient papyrus hidden among the scrolls. It spoke of a prophecy. A king will rise from the ranks of the soldiers, chosen by the gods to restore order to Egypt. The words sent a chill down his spine. Was it mere coincidence, or a sign of things to come? The pharaoh at this time was young and inexperienced, perhaps Tutankhamun
or the elderly Eye, depending on the exact year. The court was divided, with factions vying for influence. The pharaoh needed strong, loyal men to guide him, and Horemheb's reputation as a soldier and leader made him an ideal candidate. He was appointed as a royal advisor, given the title of Deputy of the King. His duties were many: overseeing the army, advising on matters of security, and acting as a bridge between the palace and the people. He worked closely with the pharaoh, earning his trust and respect. But power came at a price. Horemheb found himself drawn into the endless intrigues of the court. He had to navigate the ambitions of the priests, the jealousy of the nobles, and the suspicions of the foreign envoys. Every day brought new challenges, new dangers, new opportunities. As Horemheb rose in rank, he felt the weight of responsibility grow heavier. He was no longer just a soldier, he was a guardian of Egypt's future. The decisions he made could mean life or death for thousands. He worked tirelessly, often late into the night, reviewing reports, meeting with officials, planning for the defense of the kingdom. He missed the simplicity of the army camp, the camaraderie, the clear lines of command, the sense of purpose. In the palace, nothing was simple. Every word, every gesture, every alliance had consequences. Yet despite the challenges, Horemheb thrived. His discipline, his intelligence, and his unwavering loyalty set him apart. The people began to speak his name with respect, and even his enemies grudgingly acknowledged his abilities. There were moments when Horemheb caught glimpses of the throne, not just as a symbol of power, but as a burden, a destiny. He saw the pharaoh struggle with the demands of rule, saw the loneliness in his eyes, saw the fear that came with absolute authority. He wondered if he too could bear that weight. He wondered if the gods were guiding him, or if he was simply a man caught in the currents of history. In the quiet hours before dawn, Horemheb would walk the palace gardens, listening to the distant sounds of the city, feeling the cool air on his face. He thought of his journey from the dust of the battlefield to the heart of power, and wondered what the future would bring.
The palace, for all its splendor, was a place of shadows and secrets. By day, it bustled with life, servants hurrying through marble corridors, officials debating in sunlit courtyards, priests performing rituals in incense-filled chambers. But at night, a different world emerged. The halls grew quiet, the air thick with the scent of lotus and old stone, and the boundaries between the living and the divine seemed to blur. Horemheb, now a trusted advisor and rising star in the court, often found himself wandering the palace gardens and corridors after dark. Sleep came uneasily, chased away by the weight of responsibility and the strange dreams that haunted him. He would walk beneath the moonlight, listening to the distant sounds of the city, searching for answers in the silence. It began with dreams, vivid, unsettling visions that left Horemheb breathless and uneasy. In one, he stood alone in a vast desert, the sand swirling around him like a living thing. A great falcon circled overhead, its eyes burning with an otherworldly light. In another, he saw a throne shrouded in mist, a double crown resting on its seat, and a voice, deep and ancient, calling his name. Sometimes the dreams were darker. He saw rivers of blood, temples in ruins, the faces of friends and enemies alike twisted in fear.
He would wake in the darkness, heart pounding, the taste of fear sharp on his tongue. He told no one of these visions, not even his closest allies. In Egypt, dreams were not mere fancies. They were messages from the gods, omens of fate. But what were the gods trying to tell him? Was he being warned or chosen? Was his path of glory or of ruin? One night, as Horemheb walked the temple courtyard, he was approached by a figure cloaked in white linen. The man's face was hidden in shadow, but his voice was calm and commanding. "You are troubled, Horemheb. The gods speak to you in dreams, but you do not listen." Horemheb hesitated, unsure whether to trust this stranger, but something in the priest's presence, an air of authority, a sense of ancient wisdom, compelled him to listen. "The gods do not choose lightly," the priest continued. "Egypt is in turmoil. The old ways are threatened. The throne is weak, and the people are afraid. There are those who would see chaos reign, but there is also hope. The gods seek a champion, one who can restore Ma'at, the balance of the world." Horemheb felt a chill run through him. "Why me?" he asked quietly. "Because you have walked in darkness and light, because you have known fear and courage, loss and victory. The gods do not seek perfection, they seek strength and the will to act." Before Horemheb could respond, the priest pressed a small scroll into his hand. "Read this when you are alone," he whispered. "And remember, the gods watch, but they do not decide. The choice is yours." With that, the priest vanished into the shadows, leaving Horemheb alone beneath the stars. Back in his private chamber, Horemheb unrolled the scroll. The papyrus was old, the ink faded, but the words were clear. "A king will rise from the ranks of the soldiers, chosen not by blood, but by deed. He will restore order to the land, but his path will be marked by sacrifice. The gods will test him, and the world will change." The prophecy echoed the words he had found in the palace library, the whispers he had heard in his dreams. Was it coincidence or destiny? Horemheb could not know, but he felt the weight of the words settle on his shoulders, heavier than any armor. He spent the night in restless thought, torn between doubt and hope. Was he truly meant for greatness, or was he simply a pawn in a game he could not understand? The faces of his family, his comrades, the Pharaoh himself, all drifted through his mind, mingling with the shadows of the gods. In the days that followed, strange events seemed to multiply. A statue of Horus in the temple was found with tears of dew on its face. A falcon, sacred to the god, landed on the palace roof and remained there for 3 days, refusing to fly away. The priests whispered of omens, of the gods sending signs to guide Egypt's future. Horemheb could not ignore these wonders, nor the growing sense that his life was being shaped by forces beyond his understanding. He began to pay closer attention to the rituals, to the words of the priests, to the subtle shifts in the mood of the court. He watched for signs in the stars, in the flight of birds, in the patterns of the Nile's flood. But he also remembered the words of the mysterious priest. The gods watch, but they do not decide. The choice is yours. Horemheb knew that in the end he would have to choose his own path. The burden of destiny weighed heavily on Horemheb. He confided in no one, not even his closest allies. To speak of omens and prophecies was dangerous in a court filled with ambition and suspicion. Yet he could not escape the feeling that he was being prepared for something greater.
He threw himself into his work, overseeing the army, advising the pharaoh, rooting out corruption and disloyalty. He became known for his discipline, his fairness, his refusal to be swayed by bribes or threats. The people began to see him as a man of integrity, a leader who could be trusted. But at night, when the palace was silent and the city slept, Horemheb wrestled with his doubts. Was he strong enough to bear the weight of Egypt's future? Could he restore order to a land torn by chaos? Or would he, like so many before him, be swept away by the tides of history? Egypt stood at a crossroads. The old gods and the new, the priests and the generals, the people and the palace, all were locked in a struggle for the soul of the nation. The pharaoh was young and uncertain, the court divided, the enemies of Egypt growing bolder by the day. In this world of uncertainty, Horemheb's star continued to rise. He was respected by the army, trusted by the people, and, perhaps most importantly, watched by the gods. But the greatest test was yet to come.
The palace was restless. Whispers moved through its halls like a cold wind. The pharaoh, once the living god of Egypt, had fallen ill. Some said it was a curse from the gods, others blamed poison, and a few whispered of old age and the weight of too many secrets. Whatever the cause, the truth was clear. Egypt stood on the edge of a new era, and the throne was about to become empty. Horemheb felt the tension in every corner of the city. The priests offered endless prayers, burning incense day and night. The nobles gathered in secret, plotting their next moves. The army, loyal to Horemheb, waited for his command. The people of Egypt watched and worried, knowing that the death of a pharaoh could bring either hope or disaster. When the news finally came, it was delivered in silence. The pharaoh was dead. The palace gates were closed, and the city fell into mourning. Black cloth hung from the windows, and the sound of wailing filled the streets. Priests led processions through the city, chanting prayers to guide the king's soul to the afterlife. Horemheb stood among the mourners, his face solemn, his mind racing. He had served the pharaoh faithfully, had advised him in times of peace and war. Now he felt the weight of the future pressing down on him. Who would rule Egypt? Who could hold the kingdom together in this time of uncertainty? The answer, he knew, would not come easily. With the throne empty, the struggle for power began. The palace became a battlefield of words and whispers. Factions formed overnight. Some supported the old vizier Ai, others looked to the royal family, and a few even dreamed of foreign princes taking the crown. Bribes changed hands, promises were made and broken, and the air was thick with suspicion. Horemheb watched it all with careful eyes. He knew that every move mattered, that a single mistake could mean death. He kept his allies close and his enemies closer, listening for any sign of betrayal. He met with generals, priests, and nobles, building a network of support that stretched from the army camps to the temple altars. But the danger was real. More than once, Horemheb narrowly escaped assassination. Poisoned wine, a knife in the dark, a friendly hand that lingered too long on his shoulder. He trusted few, and slept with a dagger beneath his pillow. In this time of chaos, the army became Horemheb's greatest strength. The soldiers remembered his courage on the battlefield, his fairness as a leader, his willingness to share their hardships. They looked to him for guidance, and he did not disappoint.
He visited the camps, spoke with the men, listened to their concerns. He promised them stability, order, and a future worth fighting for. The officers pledged their loyalty, and the rank and file followed. In a land where the loyalty of the army could decide the fate of kings, Horemheb's position grew stronger by the day.
But it was not just the army that supported him. The common people, weary of intrigue and bloodshed, saw in Horemheb a man of action, a leader who understood their struggles, who had risen from their ranks. In the markets and the fields, in the temples and the taverns, his name was spoken with hope. As the days passed, the struggle for the throne reached its peak. The old vizier, cunning and ambitious, made his move. He gathered his supporters, bribed the priests, and declared himself the rightful ruler. For a time, it seemed he might succeed. But Horemheb was ready. He moved quickly, rallying the army and the people to his side. He confronted Ai in the palace, surrounded by loyal soldiers. The confrontation was tense, the air thick with the threat of violence. But in the end, Ai's support crumbled. The priests, seeing the will of the people and the strength of the army, withdrew their blessing. The nobles, sensing the shift in power, abandoned their old master. Ai was exiled, his ambitions ended, not by blood, but by the quiet force of unity. The palace, once a nest of vipers, fell silent. With the throne empty and the kingdom in need, all eyes turned to Horemheb. The priests approached him, offering the double crown of Egypt. The generals saluted, the people cheered, and the scribes prepared to record a new chapter in the history of the land. But Horemheb hesitated. He stood in the great hall, the weight of the crown in his hands, and thought of all that had brought him to this moment. He remembered the dust of the battlefield, the faces of friends lost in war, the dreams that had haunted him since childhood. He thought of the prophecy, the words of the mysterious priest, the omens and signs that had followed him. Was he truly meant to be king? Was this the will of the gods or the result of his own choices? Could he bear the burden of Egypt's future? In that moment, Horemheb made his decision. He accepted the crown, not for glory, not for power, but for the hope of restoring order to a land he loved. The day of Horemheb's coronation was one of both joy and solemnity. The city was decorated with banners and flowers, the temples filled with music and incense. Priests led processions through the streets, carrying sacred relics and chanting prayers for the new king. In the great temple, Horemheb knelt before the high priest, who placed the double crown upon his head. The crowd erupted in cheers, and the sound echoed through the city, across the river, and into the fields beyond. Horemheb rose, no longer just a soldier or an advisor, but Pharaoh of Egypt, chosen by the gods, supported by the people, and tested by fate. As the celebrations continued, Horemheb withdrew to a quiet chamber, seeking a moment of peace. He looked over the city, the Nile shining in the afternoon sun, and felt a mixture of pride and fear. The journey from the dust of the army camp to the throne of Egypt was long and hard, but the real challenge was just beginning. He knew that the road ahead would be filled with dangers, enemies within and without, the ever-present threat of betrayal, the burden of ruling a land as ancient and complex as Egypt. But he also knew that he was not alone. The army, the people, and, perhaps, the gods themselves stood with him. Horemheb vowed to rule with justice and strength, to restore Ma'at, the balance of the world, and to honor the memory of those who had come before him. He was no longer just a man. He was a symbol of hope, a bridge between the past and the future. That night, as the city slept and the Nile flowed quietly beneath the stars, Horemheb sat alone, the crown resting beside him. He thought of all he had lost and all he had gained. He wondered if he would be remembered as a great king or just another name in the endless list of rulers. He remembered the words of the priest, "The gods watch, but they do not decide. The choice is yours." Horemheb knew that his choices from this day forward would shape the destiny of Egypt. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and prepared to face the dawn.
The coronation of Horemheb marked the beginning of a new era for Egypt. The people, weary from years of uncertainty and intrigue, looked to their new pharaoh with hope and expectation. Horemheb, once a simple soldier, now bore the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. The weight of the nation rested on his shoulders. He knew that Egypt needed more than a king. It needed a healer, a restorer, a leader who could bring order to chaos. Horemheb was determined to be that leader. One of Horemheb's first acts as pharaoh was to reform the army. He knew its strengths and weaknesses better than anyone. He promoted men of merit, not just those of noble birth. He rewarded loyalty and skill, and he demanded discipline and honesty. Corruption, which had crept into the ranks during the years of turmoil, was rooted out with swift justice. He also turned his attention to the administration of the kingdom. The bureaucracy had grown bloated and inefficient, filled with officials more interested in their own wealth than the good of the people. Horemheb issued new laws, known as the Edicts of Horemheb, aimed at restoring justice and fairness. He established courts to hear the complaints of ordinary citizens, and he made it clear that no one, not even the highest official, was above the law. These reforms were not always popular. Some nobles and priests resented the loss of their privileges, but Horemheb was firm. He believed that Egypt could only be strong if it was just. The temples remained powerful, and Horemheb knew he could not rule without their support. He worked to rebuild the relationship between the throne and the priesthood, which had been damaged by the religious upheavals of previous reigns. He restored the old gods to their places of honor, reopened temples that had been closed, and supported the great festivals that united the people in faith. But Horemheb was careful not to let the priests become too powerful. He kept a watchful eye on their activities, ensuring that their influence served the kingdom, not just their own interests. He respected their wisdom, but he did not fear them. Egypt had suffered from years of instability. Bandits roamed the countryside. Tax collectors abused their power, and the people lived in fear of both criminals and corrupt officials. Horemheb sent trusted men to every corner of the land, charged with restoring order and enforcing the new laws. He held public trials in the great cities, where the guilty were punished and the innocent protected. He listened to the complaints of farmers and craftsmen, of widows and orphans. He made it clear that justice was not just a word, but a promise. These actions won him the loyalty of the common people. They saw in Horemheb a king who cared for their welfare, who remembered what it was like to be one of them. Corruption was a disease that had spread through every level of society. Horemheb attacked it with the same determination he had shown on the battlefield. He dismissed officials who took bribes, punished judges who sold verdicts, and replaced tax collectors who cheated the people. He established a system of inspectors, trusted men who traveled the land in secret, reporting directly to the Pharaoh. Their task was to uncover wrongdoing and ensure that the laws were obeyed. No one was safe from their scrutiny, and many powerful men fell from grace. These measures were harsh, but Horemheb believed they were necessary. He knew that a kingdom built on injustice could not endure.
Despite his successes, Horemheb found that ruling Egypt was a lonely and difficult task. The palace, once a place of ambition and intrigue, was now a place of responsibility and solitude. Every decision weighed heavily on him. Every failure haunted his dreams. He missed the camaraderie of the army camp, the simple joys of friendship and laughter. Now he was surrounded by courtiers and officials, all eager to please, but few he could truly trust. He knew that enemies still lurked in the shadows, waiting for a moment of weakness. At night, Horemheb would walk the palace gardens, seeking solace in the quiet beauty of the lotus ponds and the gentle rustle of palm leaves. He thought of the men he had lost, the friends who had fallen in battle, the family he rarely saw. He wondered if they would recognize the man he had become. There were times when Horemheb doubted himself. Was he truly the right man to rule Egypt? Could he restore the balance that had been lost? The weight of the crown was heavy, and the path ahead was uncertain. He remembered the words of the mysterious priest, "The gods watch, but they do not decide. The choice is yours." Horemheb knew that every choice he made would shape the future of Egypt. He sought wisdom from the priests, from his advisors, and from the old stories of the pharaohs who had come before him. He listened to the people, to their hopes and fears, and tried to rule with compassion as well as strength. No reign is without its dangers. Horemheb faced plots against his life, attempts to undermine his authority, and the constant threat of rebellion. He dealt with these threats firmly, but not without mercy. He believed that justice, not fear, was the foundation of true power. He forgave those who repented, but punished those who persisted in treachery. He knew that a king must be both strong and wise, both feared and loved. Unlike many pharaohs, Horemheb did not isolate himself from his subjects. He traveled throughout Egypt, visiting cities and villages, listening to the concerns of the people. He attended festivals, presided over ceremonies, and made offerings at the great temples. The people saw him not just as a distant god-king, but as a man who understood their lives. They cheered his arrival, brought him gifts, and told him their stories. Horemheb listened, and he remembered. As the years passed, Egypt grew stronger. The fields were fertile, the temples were full, and the roads were safe. Horemheb's reforms laid the foundation for a new era of stability and prosperity. But he knew that his time was limited.
He thought often of the future, of the kings who would follow him, of the legacy he would leave behind. He hoped that they would remember not just his victories, but his struggles, his doubts, and his dreams. He hoped that Egypt would remember the lesson he had learned, that greatness is not born of blood or birth, but of courage, justice, and the will to serve.
The years passed, and the seasons turned. Horemheb, once the young soldier with dreams of glory, now walked the palace halls as an aging king. His hair had grown gray, his face lined with the cares of rule, but his eyes still held the same quiet determination that had carried him from the dust of the battlefield to the throne of Egypt. He had seen much in his life: victory and defeat, loyalty and betrayal, hope and despair. He had known the loneliness of power, the burden of responsibility, and the fleeting joy of triumph. Now, as the end of his reign approached, Horemheb found himself looking back, searching for meaning in the long journey he had traveled. In the quiet hours of the night, Horemheb would sit by the window of his private chamber, gazing out over the city and the river that had shaped his life. He remembered the faces of those he had loved and lost: his mother, his comrades in arms, the friends who had fallen in battle or been claimed by the intrigues of the court. He thought of the choices he had made, the battles fought, the laws written, the enemies forgiven or punished. He wondered if he had done enough, if he had truly restored Ma'at, the balance and order that Egypt so desperately needed. Sometimes he felt regret. There were moments when he had been too harsh, too quick to judge, too slow to trust. There were friends he had lost, opportunities missed, words left unspoken. But there was also pride in the peace he had brought, the justice he had restored, the hope he had given to a weary people. Horemheb knew that his time was drawing to a close. He had no sons to inherit the throne, no bloodline to continue his name, but he hoped that his legacy would endure, not in monuments or treasures, but in the hearts of the people and the strength of the nation he had rebuilt. He spent his final years preparing Egypt for the future. He chose a worthy successor, a man of integrity and wisdom, to carry on his work. He met with priests and officials, ensuring that the laws he had established would be respected. He visited the temples, offering prayers for the land and its people. In his last days, Horemheb found comfort in the simple things: the laughter of children in the palace gardens, the songs of the workers in the fields, the gentle lapping of the Nile against the shore. He knew that life would go on, that Egypt would endure, as it always had. On his final night, Horemheb walked alone through the palace, his footsteps echoing in the empty halls. He paused in the great hall where the double crown rested on its pedestal, a symbol of all he had achieved and all he had sacrificed. He thought of the prophecy, the words of the mysterious priest, the dreams that had haunted him for so many years. Had he fulfilled his destiny? Had he been chosen by the gods, or had he simply chosen himself? He realized at last that it did not matter. What mattered was the choice he had made: to serve, to lead, to fight for justice and peace. The gods may watch, but it is men who shape the world. As dawn broke over the city, Horemheb breathed his last, his heart at peace. The people mourned their king, but they also celebrated his life, a life of courage, sacrifice, and hope. The story of Horemheb is not just the story of a king. It is the story of every person who has faced hardship and doubt, who has struggled to do what is right, who has dared to dream of a better world. It is a reminder that greatness is not given, but earned, that the path to glory is paved with sacrifice and struggle, that even the humblest among us can change the course of history if we have the courage to act. As you listen to this story, Perhaps as you drift into sleep, remember the lesson of Horemheb. No matter where you begin, no matter how dark the night, there is always a path forward. The choices you make, the kindness you show, the strength you find in yourself, these are the things that shape your destiny. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of Horemheb, the soldier who became Pharaoh. If you enjoyed this story, please let us know by liking the video and subscribing to our channel for more journeys into the mysteries of the ancient world. May your dreams tonight be filled with courage, hope, and the wisdom of the ages. Good night.